Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this talk sponsored by the Friends of the Bodleian. I'm Richard McCabe, the chairman of the Friends. I'm delighted to see so many of you gathered here today despite the rain. Before I introduce today's speakers, I have just a couple of housekeeping announcements that I hope will assist the many friends who are joining us online. For the best view of the proceedings, select Speaker View from the top right-hand button of your screen. You'll notice that automatic closed captioning is in operation, but that can be discontinued by clicking the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom of the screen. Now, unfortunately, today we're somewhat understaffed, so we won't be able to take online questions. We can only take questions from those present in the hall. I do apologize for that. It gives me great pleasure then to introduce today's two speakers. Charlotta Forss is currently assistant professor in history at Södertörn University in Stockholm, and her research focuses on the early modern period and concerns the intersection between cultural history and the history of science. She examines how daily routines and attitudes have shaped man's understanding of the world. She's particularly interested in the concepts around which people construct their worldviews and how these worldviews are continuously formed and renegotiated in relation to spatial and bodily experiences. Her ongoing project is entitled Is Winter Coming? Early Modern Interpretations of the North around the Baltic Sea. But today she is here to talk about mapping the North. Myth, Exploration and Encounter, which appeared very recently from Bodleian Libraries Publishing. And the better to help her to discuss that, we have the head of Bodleian Libraries Publishing, Samuel Fanous. Bodleian Libraries Publishing produces a range of trade books which attempt to bring the riches of Oxford's libraries to readers worldwide. The list is distributed and reviewed globally and has been recognized for its contribution to cultural publishing. Samuel himself has lectured widely on cultural publishing and has advised libraries, museums, and galleries on their publishing programs. He's also a member of the Oxford English faculty, as am I, and is engaged in research in the field of medieval English literature. And he has brought a catalogue today of the publications, current publications, and please, you are welcome to take one on your way out. Also, Charlotta's book is on sale in the library bookshop where there is a small display, and she'll be happy to sign copies for anyone who wishes in the Blackwell Hall outside just after the lecture. So please give our speakers a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Richard. In the modest library of my childhood home was a copy of the oversized Times Atlas, which I used to take down as a boy, and sitting on the rug in my father's study, would open it and turn the pages, mesmerized by the names, exotic names of faraway places. And I would run my fingers, I remember, over the contours of the maps and where the land joined the sea. I was especially drawn to Earth's extremities, the polar regions, the Himalayas, and in my school library, I found books on the exploits, primarily of the English explorers, Sir John Franklin and his doomed expedition to find the Northwest Passage, Captain Scott and his journeys in the Antarctic, and also George Mallory's attempt to climb Everest, which was then thought of as the third pole, or referred to as the third pole. From there, I borrowed books on the Scandinavian explorers, Roald Amundsen, and especially the dashing, the eminently romantic Fridtjof Nansen. And I think this instilled in me an unquenchable, lifelong love of the affection for the idea of the North or northernness. And maybe that planted the seed that would develop one day into thinking about a book like this. I saw a lecture a few years ago advertised in the Bodleian that sparked my imagination. and it was given by Charlotta here in the Bodleian. And I asked our wonderful map librarian, Nick Milley, whether this might be a suitable author, or if he knew of suitable authors that could undertake a book like this. And I'm delighted to say that he said, yes, I do. And I think she would be brilliant at it. And I was delighted to discover that she's a friendly Viking. Who is not only not only an expert on northern maps, but on exploration and myth and these subjects. And several years later, this was the result of the book. So thank you, Charlotta, for agreeing to write the book. I want to begin with want to begin our talk with just define some definitions and from first principles. We speak about the North as if we all know what it is, but in fact, I think it's not a fixed category. What is the North and where is it?
Thank you, Samuel, and it's lovely to be here and to come back here really and talk about the book, not just as an idea, but as a book and ideas and the idea of the North. I mean, that's where it's kind of the heart of the matter, right? And I guess it's one of those things that it can be many things. So it's, on the one hand, we have the North as anywhere north of where we are. Or if we're on the South Pole, everything is north in a sense, and then perhaps that makes it a somewhat elusive concept. But then it's also, I think, has developed this notion that the North is a specific place with certain characteristics, which have changed over time, but which are also somewhat amazingly pervasive over time as well. So I actually at the beginning of this book project, I was thinking that I wanted to have a definition of the North to start out with, and kind of to help me work through selection of the many maps that I could have worked with. But over time, I realized that would have been really quite limiting, because it's part of what's fascinating here is that people have had these different ideas of where the North is located. So, take an example in Greek ancient antiquity. In Greek antiquity, the North was the farthest north was located at the mythical island of Thule at 63 degrees north, and that was an island reported as a place where the sun shone 6 months of the year, because the sun would never set, and of mists and of these strange phenomena, strange natural phenomena, strange people. Then over the course of history, obviously, as more has been known, then these ideas have changed, and in some ways the North has shrunk, I guess. So we have, in the present day, we might say that, okay, this is a book about the North, so it ought to be a book about the north of England or the north of Sweden. But then again, that depends on whose perspective we're looking at. We might say that we will demarcate the North as the Arctic Circle at 66 degrees north. But then that also leaves out areas which, in terms of climate and culture, I think most of us would think to be in the North. Sometimes the North is defined by climate, saying that it has so the standard definition there would be that the North, or the Arctic, is all parts of the world where you have the warmest month in the summer has an average degree, average monthly degree that doesn't exceed 10 degrees Celsius. Which, of course, with that definition, we have a shrinking North again. So with climate change, a smaller area can be called Arctic or North. So it's really, it's partly a disappointing answer that I can't really say where the North is, but it's also partly what makes this interesting, I think, that it varies over time and between perspectives.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is that North depends on where you're actually standing.
Oh, it does. Yes.
If you're maybe on the equator, North might be, you might define North where North begins further south, but the further north you are, the further north becomes,
yes,
as it were.
Yeah.
And that's affected by so many other factors.
Yes, though there's also an interesting thing here that we might think of north as on the one hand that which is far away and the kind of the slightly mythical, strange, distant north. But one of the things I find really interesting is that we have in parallel the kind of claiming of the north. So the genesis of this book, from my perspective, was in researching 17th century Swedish scholars and politicians who were saying that we are the North. Sweden is the kind of the lion of the North, is here to conquer Europe. So it's an area of a period of Swedish expansion where they were interested in promoting Swedish culture to a European audience and doing that through saying that they were inhabiting the North. Right.
So it's not just people looking north and saying, we're not north, but that is. It's also people who are in the north saying, hold on, we are the north. And
Yes.
we want to tell people about what it is to be the north.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Why should we look at maps to understand the north? What is it about maps that help us understand the idea of northernness and the north?
Thank you. Yeah. So I think one of the really interesting things about maps is that, well, so people have known since antiquity, really learned in learned circles in Europe and in the Middle East that the world is round. So it's been well known that okay, something is up there, but it's been for the majority of the population of the world, the very furthermost north of the world have been out of reach, and that has to a large extent have to do with the climate and the difficult environment of traversing the North Seas and ice. And that has meant that you have this situation of the furthest north being a known unknown. It's some place that you know to exist, but it's outside of the direct experience. It might be in the present day, it might be somewhat similar to how we think of certain, well, of space, right? There are things that we know ought to exist, but we haven't experienced them, but we will still theorize about what they look like. And with a map, if you're making a globe, you can either decide to leave the areas that you don't know that much about. You can leave them blank, or you can fill them with something. And I think those, over time, and map makers have developed different strategies for how to handling this kind of the insight that there is something there, but we can't actually reach it, or we have information, but how can we verify that information? How can we make our maps authoritative so that people will buy them? And I actually have a couple of examples of that. So if we start with a map made by a Dutch map maker named Henricus Hondius, and was published in the 1630s. And Hondius, he was based in Amsterdam, was a proficient map maker and published atlases and maps. And this is his solution of what to do with this known unknown in the farthest north. So it's a map that shows you outlines and then just emptiness. So in a sense, so Hondius actually he made globes as well, and he printed with some of his globes. He printed a disclaimer saying that, so don't be worried that this is that this map might look different from others that we have published before, but there are new reports coming in all the time, so you need to buy the newest and most updated map of these faraway areas.
Brilliant publishing strategy.
That might be some lessons there.
Buy my next book.
Yes. Well, I guess so. That's of course at this time true for quite a few parts of the world. But what makes the North really interesting, in particular, I think, is that it's one of the areas of the world that has remained partly unknown for the longest time. So you can really follow these long-term trends that I find really fascinating. And then, of course, not all map makers would have this emptiness. Instead, there were other versions, and this map is giving you a very different view of the North Pole. And this is Gerard Mercator, so the very famous map maker, Flemish map maker, who made a world map promoting his Mercator projection in 1569. And for that, with the Mercator projection, the South and North Pole becomes so distorted that it's not very useful. So for his world map then, because of the format of the map, he felt that he needed to make a separate map of the North Pole. And that map was the first map. And this is a larger version, a standalone version, that is really the first standalone version of map of the North Pole that we have from this European tradition, at least. And it shows you a very different view from the previous map. And this map, it builds on a travel narrative called Inventio Fortunata. And it was a travel narrative that is now lost, but which was circulating in European circles for a few decades in 15th and 16th centuries. And it was the account of an English Mennonite friar who had visited the North Pole in 1360, and then came back to write about it, or at least that's what the idea was. That's what the narrative claimed. And this Mennonite friar, he reported that at the North Pole, it consists of a magnetic mountain surrounded by a whirlpool sea. So the actual North Pole had this cavity where the water flowed in, so created very strong currents. And then you had 4 islands divided by 19 rivers, and the water would flow through these rivers towards this whirlpool sea. And the account described how this meant that no ships could return once they had entered this whirlpool sea, which then, of course, I mean, how could he survive to come back and tell us about this? But, well, I guess that's perhaps besides the point. And the narrative also described this open sea at the pole, which was a very long-lived idea all the way into the 19th century, actually. And Mercator, I mean, he decided that, okay, this is information. This is a possibility. It might look like this, and the future will tell whether it's true or not. But it became a very influential way of portraying the North Pole. And I think this kind of, what do you do with this uncertain knowledge? How do you choose to present something, or to kind of to leave blanks? And I think that maps are really showing us how the medium here is shaping what the map makers are putting on these maps. Yeah.
And I mean, this raises an interesting question. If you're trying to illustrate a place and you've been there, well, you know what it looks like, so you can maybe make a picture of it. But if you've never been to the North Pole, how do you represent it?
Yes.
And is there a sense in which maps are a way of doing that?
Yes, absolutely. I think, yeah. And I think also, I mean, it's so there are these early modern map makers. They used travel narratives, and quite often they used the medieval travel narratives, like the accounts of St. Brendan, and these were accounts that were describing either real or fictional travel through the North Seas, for example. But these maps are giving the narratives coordinates, spatial coordinates, and somehow kind of fixing them in a certain place, and fixing phenomena in a certain place. So if we go back to the previous map, Hondius's maps, we have the actual map of the Northern Seas, but it's surrounded by these decorative elements which show us the whaling industry. So the booming whaling industry in the early 17th century, and it's, of course, whales, they inhabit the oceans and swim across the oceans, but this map is locating them in the north and making them a part of this northern scenery. The animals, but even also the kind of the commercial aspect of the extraction of natural resources of the north.
Yeah.
It goes hand in hand with map making as well.
And those embellishments and everything about the map, the color, the contours. It's a curious thing, but maps somehow help us to visualize a place in a unique way, don't they?
Yeah, I think they do.
And that's sort of, in a way, in this picture, brought home by in this map, by the picture, by the art, the whales, the animals. It's sort of building a a kind of imaginary picture of a place.
Yes, I think that's true. Though of course, I mean, one of the things that I wanted with this book was there are so many fantastic decorative maps of the North that are both maps and they're works of art as well. But then I also wanted there to be some ugly maps or some simple maps, some simple drawings, because of course the map is a way of creating a spatial narrative, but it's also the standards for what that looked like change over time, and it also changed with the cultural conventions. So one thing I wanted to do here was then so as I mentioned, you have this perspective of the North as the far away, the distant North, but also the North as something which is the kind of inside perspectives on the North, the changing between different views of the North, and a map which really brings that to fore is this map, which was made by, unfortunately, an anonymous map maker. It's from a person from the Yupik people who live on the Chukotka Peninsula in present-day Russia, and it's a map made in the 19th century. It's on sealskin, and you can see the original in the Pitt Rivers Museum. It's quite big. It's a large map, and it has the way the map is oriented at the moment, and this is a map where you could walk around it and see it from different. It has different viewpoints in it, but the top of the map is the Russian coast, and then the bottom right-hand side of the map is the American coast, and it shows us a very industrious North in a sense. So you have the whaling industry again at the very forefront of the map. This is a map that not necessarily does give us identifiable geographical information, but as much it gives us these scenes from daily life and from whale fishing. And we have European whaling vessels next to Inuit kayaks. At the very bottom of the map, I think I have a pointer. Right here, we have a high-masted ship, so a western ship that is anchored to the coast, possibly for winter and for trading.
That's interesting. It leads me on really to my next question, which is we started out talking about where the North is and how you define North, and I'd like to go on from that to talk about whose perception or definition of North, whose idea of North you talk about in the book, and who's actually doing the mapping.
Yes. So I think that's, in a way, it is this. I try to change between perspectives so that we get this far away North, but also these insider perspectives. Now, even these insider perspectives are, if we're talking about Inuit maps of the North, they are often mediated through European and American explorers, and in this case, the map was we only have this map, so we don't know how representative it is of this people, but at least you can get a start of a sense of kind of changing that narrative of only looking at it from the outside. But of course, there are different inside perspectives as well. It would be far too simplistic to say that you have that it's a simple dichotomy. So I've also worked quite a lot with thinking about different insider perspectives. And this map, if you write a map about a book about the mapping of the North, you can't really not include Olaus Magnus' wonderful Carta Marina, or a description of Northern Europe. And this is a map. It was published in 1539. Olaus Magnus, he was a cleric, the last Catholic Archbishop of Sweden, though when he was named Archbishop of Sweden, he had actually fled from the country with his brother because of the Reformation, and he was opposed to the Reformation. And this is Olaus Magnus. This is his way of trying to persuade Catholic Europe to not let go of Scandinavia. It's a propaganda work. And I wonder if you can, it might be too difficult to actually see, but this map is available online. So you could have a look at it later on as well. But in the very bottom corner of the map, there's a lion, and right next to it, there's a small depiction of a little mouse. And Olaus Magnus is referring here to the fable of a lion who gets a stick in his foot, and then he's being helped by a mouse. So the idea is here that even the mighty, even mighty Europe, even the Pope can be saved by this even if an actor that might seem insignificant. But he's also saying at the same time, he's trying to say that, oh, actually the Northern Europe is this part of the world which is exotic and rich in both natural resources and in culture. So the map is full of these images of daily life in the Nordic, and also of the seas are also filled with sea creatures, of both monstrous creatures and whales. And I think that's also one of the things that's fascinating with maps, that we have this. There's this. I think it's a relatively widespread this idea of the kind of the cold, inhospitable, empty north. But one thing that really is obvious with looking at maps is that that is one narrative that is there, but we also have this much more varied, populated, inhabited north, and especially perhaps from these insider perspectives on the north.
Yes, I'm sure they have the knowledge, so therefore they don't need to depict an empty map.
No, I guess.
They know exactly. Okay, interesting. Thinking about your selection of maps for the book, how did you go about choosing? You must have had an enormous array of maps. How did you go about choosing these? And were there any particular maps, if you had too many to choose from, are there any particular maps that you maybe wanted to write about but couldn't because of restrictions of space?
Yes, this was really this was a point of a lot of headache, but also a lot of fun, because there are so many that I could have included. So being an early modernist, and in a way going out of my comfort zone with making this somewhat longer history of maps of the North, I started out with an early modern pilot study, you might say, looking at maps that were well known and familiar to me, and then identifying themes that I wanted to continue working with. And these were primarily this idea of the kind of how do you construct knowledge of a place that you don't know, and then this idea of the uninhabited and inhabited North, and then going backwards and forwards in time. So there were a few maps that I didn't write about, or many maps I didn't write about that I would have wanted to, but I put with me one of them in particular, and I think we have to go forward we might return to these later, but here we are. And the very reason why I didn't write about this map is that it's written it's made in 1975. So and I end the book at the early 20th century. But it's a map that is made by a Norwegian artist and a Sami artist who's then made a map of Sapmi, so the Sami lands in northern Scandinavia, and he's made this map with Sami place names, only Sami place names. And this is a lifelong project of his. So he's made this map, but also an atlas with regional maps with Sami place names. And I think this map also illustrates something that I did write quite a lot about in the book, and that the kind of the power dimension of maps, that what language the place names are in, and who gets to present their perspective of a region is really important. Well, I mean, maps both start conflicts and end conflicts in a sense, and perhaps I could give an example of that that suddenly has a lot of relevance for what's happening in the news and in the world today. So one of the episodes that I write about it in the book is the question of the Peary Channel on northern Greenland. And Robert Peary is well known for claiming to have discovered the North Pole in 1909, but that trip was just one of many trips that he made So he was an American explorer, and he was traveling to northern Greenland and trying to push further north for dashing for the North Pole. And in 1892, he made a trip to northern Greenland, where he then came back, reported that he had found a channel that separated Greenland from a large island to the north of Greenland, and he called that the Peary Channel. I used his own name for quite a lot of things. Very, very humble man. So he claimed that. So now there's this land north of Greenland, and I claim it for the U.S. And that didn't go down well in Denmark. A few years later, we have the Denmark expedition with Ludvig Milius Eriksen as a commander, and they set out north. And they, as a basis for this expedition, they studied the map that Robert Peary had published, and they used that as a basis for this expedition. And very tragically, the leader of the expedition and a few of his crew members died, and the fate of their explorations were not known. It was thought that they might have left a cairn with some instructions on what they had found, but they never returned back to Denmark. So a few years after that, a new expedition set out, and they traveled north. That expedition was also unlucky, which is a theme in polar exploration, but they got problems with their ship, and they were stranded on the coast, northern coast of Greenland. So two of the expedition members set out north to travel on foot and try to find this cairn of the lost Milius Eriksen expedition, and they did find it, and it had in it a piece of paper on which it said, the Peary Channel does not exist. But coming back, these two expedition members realized that the rest of the crew had managed to flag down a ship while they were gone, and they had left back for Denmark. So these poor two men, they were stuck in the northern Greenland, and they managed to survive a winter, and then throughout the next summer, they were hoping that there would come someone to pick them up, and it didn't happen. So they survived another winter, and then they were picked up and brought back home, and Denmark felt more secure than in the kind of claiming Greenland than they had before.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Extraordinary contemporary echoes as well.
Yes.
Okay. The inevitable question, I think a number of people have asked this. Do you have any favorite maps that you included in the book? We talked about what you couldn't include.
Yes.
Can you tell us about those you were especially fond of?
Yes. Yes. And I think maybe we can, that there are a number, but perhaps let's start with this one and stay with Greenland. So this is a map made by a man from eastern Greenland. He was called Kunit, and he was from the Assamalik people. And he made the map and sold it to a Danish explorer who was traveling through Greenland in the 1880s. And the map is a map of the coast, a part of the coast of Greenland, and it's really pushes our boundaries of what a map is. But this is really a spatial representation of space. It's made in wood, and it consists of two parts. So we have this part that shows us the coastline, and it starts, the southernmost tip is here, and then you travel north here, and further north here, and up the coast here. So that's the very top is both the southernmost and the northernmost part of the coast. And then next to it, we have a map representing a set of islands along the coast. And these are carved pieces of wood, and then they have this little kind of pieces in between them so that they hold together. But it means, of course, that if you wanted to actually tell someone about what the coast of Greenland, of this part of Greenland, looked like, you would have to move both pieces of the map simultaneously and quite delicately as well. So to be able to read this map, you would have to have a very good local knowledge of of the geography. And it's a map that might look like it's showing us just an empty coastline, but that's not the case. This is actually a map which shows us remnants of inhabitation as well. So, for example, the third island here is an island called Depotö, so Depot Island, and it has a carving at the point here, which shows us an abandoned settlement that was at Kunit's time used for storing hunting implements. And in his account, Gustav Holm describes how Kunit made these maps for him, but that the people from this Assamalik people, they would come and study the maps that Gustav Holm had brought with them, and they would correct them, and then they would also correct Kunit's map, showing us this kind of these Danish explorers working, then kind of relying on the information from people locally to create these bigger maps of the north.
It's such a brilliant map because it's waterproof. It's very portable. If you're trying to navigate the coastline, you just follow the contours of the and it's handheld. You haven't got to unfold it. It's not going to break.
And it's three-dimensional as well.
And it's three-dimensional. Mm. And I love the fact that it's based on local knowledge, the lore of local geography.
Yeah. But this map is a map where local knowledge is prized highly. But we see also here, I mean, there are very clear power dimensions and power conflicts within this map. So another map, which I really like. Yes, here we are. So this map was made by the British Admiralty, and it's a map of northern Canada and King William Island. And this was made in the early 20th century, and it was in the wake of the Franklin expedition, which disappeared in the 1840s. And after Sir John Franklin had disappeared, of course, there were many expeditions sent out to try to find the two ships, the Terror and the Erebus, and the crew members. And over time also, these expeditions created a lot of geographical knowledge about this part of the world, though they didn't find the ships. But there were different kinds of finds related to the expedition. And this map is an account of where they found different things that they were related to these two expeditions. And the account shows us, and just to make sure it's the colorings. Yeah, so all of the writing, all of the legends in blue here are discoveries made by polar explorers or American and European polar explorers related to the lost Franklin expedition. And the red then are made by Inuits, and the map notes that the red information then made by the Inuits is probably not altogether trustworthy, which is typical for the time, but which is quite ironic given the fact that these two ships, the HMS Terror and Erebus, were actually found just a few years ago in 2014 and 16, and that was as a result of listening to traditions among the local Inuit people who had these information traded over the course of generations about where these ships were located, and actually following that information, they were found.
So they had the local knowledge. Are there any other favorite maps you wanted to talk about before we?
I think let's stay with this map. So this is a map made by an Icelandic bishop, and then being part of Danish collections, because Iceland was incorporated in the early modern Danish Empire. And at this time when the map was made, so in the let's see if we're so in the mid 17th century, there were several, as part of a collection of manuscripts, maps that were produced as a part of a Danish ambition to create a Danish space of the Northern Atlantic. and that's what this map shows us. So it shows us contemporary information, but it also shows us the Norse settlements of Greenland, which took place around the year 1000, and which were then written about in the Icelandic sagas, the Vinland sagas. And then these settlements, they had died down, or they died out by the early 16th century at the very least. But a few centuries later, then there was this interest of trying to reclaim the North Atlantic. And that part of that had to do with trying to carve out a piece of history of kind of highlighting the Norse as a part of a cultural heritage. But it also had to do with a booming fishing industry in the North Atlantic. So we have this dual thing again, where you have the commercial interests and these cultural heritage that is there and kind of working together. So the map shows us the settlements that on Greenland, that the Viking settlements of Greenland, and here you have the navigatio vetus, so the old navigation, so that the route that the travelers, the Viking travelers, the Norse travelers would have taken around the year 1000, and then you have the navigatio nova, that they were traveling at the time when the map was made. And the reason why they are taking two different routes to Greenland is because when the time this map was made in the 17th century, we're at the very coldest part of the Little Ice Age. So a route that would have been navigable in around the year 1000 was now ice covered. So they had to actually travel the southern route here. So this is one of the earliest maps documenting climate change in a way.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah.
You've selected so many maps for this book, more than we can unfortunately see this afternoon. But I want to ask you about how you set about the process. Did you begin by having a list of maps and then saying, okay, what story can I weave around those? Or do you begin with a story and saying, what maps can illustrate this story?
Yeah, yes, a good question. I think it probably was a bit of both, to the extent that so this is a book it's very it's focusing on the maps, and it's highlighting the maps and trying to tell the stories of the people who were involved in making the maps, and in some cases in using the maps as well. But there's quite a lot of research that has been done on the idea of the North, but perhaps looking more at literature, at politics. So I had a sense of some of the ideas that were pervasive in earlier research, and that I wanted to then explore to see what would happen if there were themes that remained important in maps, or if there were things that would stand out and that would different in the maps. And I guess to some extent, yeah, there are a lot of similarities. There's a general narrative, but then there are also these things that, for example, the fact that a map, it might be a map of a completely uninhabited space, but when you make a map, you inscribe it with place names, not least, and quite often, if we look at somewhat older maps, also with giving it a character through the different elements of the map. Even this map is giving us some kind of characterization of this space. So for example, we have a whirlpool here, which is then possibly a reference to this Mercator's idea of the kind of whirlpool at the North Pole, but also referencing travels reports from this period of the whirlpools and the kind of dangerous sailing conditions in this part of the world.
Okay, so you've got your tentative list of maps. Can you take us a little bit behind the scenes and tell us what it was like maybe to write this book? What were some of the things you have to think about, and what were some of the issues?
So it was one thing was I wanted to forefront some of the personal stories and the kind of some of the individuals that were involved in these processes. And that, of course, meant covering such a long period of time. It also meant touching on a lot of different fields of historical research. And I think historians, we tend to sometimes be quite worried about these long-term narratives, but I thought that was important to try to switch between the long-term narratives and then to focus on the narratives. I did have a few points where I got a little bit worried by the kind of the current debates, we might say. So at one point when these issues about Greenland came to the fore again in the news, I went back to the manuscript and wondered whether I had given the Trump an argument for the American claim for Greenland, and then I was very happy to discover that I had not. But there's, I mean, there are also.
It's very flattering to think that the American foreign policy might be decided by reading Bodleian Library books.
Well, hopefully not, but I mean,
or
maps,
influenced by them.
Yeah, but maps matter. I mean, there are politics in them, and in historical maps, we might think that this is an old map, and we're studying it because it's fascinating, but it's also, it has these political dimensions, and it kind of showcases these power relations.
And spatial dimensions too. I was reading the other day that maybe the idea of one reason why Greenland might look so attractive to Mr. Trump is because of the Mercator projection, and it looks enormous. And if he actually went there, he might be slightly disappointed to find that it's not a realistic projection.
The Mercator was right in thinking that we needed a separate map for the northernmost coast.
Perhaps the Bodleian Map Group could send him a proper proportion map of Greenland. Sorry.
Maybe.
But yes, sorry, carry on. Tell us more about the process of writing the book and some of the things you had to think about.
Yeah, so I wanted to, so I have an example of someone it was quite difficult to write about, and it's this man, Olof Rudbeck, who was a Swedish historian, a polymath, and he started out as a student of medicine, and he was one of the people who discovered the lymphatic system when he was only 22 years old in 1654. And then he got interested in map making, and he had an epiphany when he was making a map of one of the Icelandic sagas, and he writes that, like in a dream, I felt like I had discovered the ancient myths again. So his idea and what he realized, that ancient authors like Plato and Aristotle, like Ptolemaeus, were actually not writing about the Mediterranean, but they were writing about Sweden. And his idea then was that Sweden was really the sunken continent Atlantis. And this is I mean, it's a wonderful character, and it's interesting in that it kind of pushes the way in which we think about authority and how you legitimate your knowledge claims, because he had a standing as an authority in his own time, though he also received some critique for some of his most outlandish claims. But he really wanted his readers to see him as this grand figure. So you can see him here in the middle, kind of towering over these ancient authorities, and he looks quite smug, I think, when he lifts the kind of the surface of the earth to receive that. So it says Sweden here, and then underneath it says the island of the gods. So telling us that if you study geography, then you will find that Sweden is actually the island of the gods. And working with Rudbeck, you really have to be careful not to get stuck in that kind of the fantastical details, but try to think about him as a man of his time and the ways in which he was speaking to contemporaries. So that's, and I think for me, one of the keys of doing that was looking at his maps. and the ways that he was using maps to say something about, well, to create his scientific argument, in a sense. So looking at the methods he was working with. And that's I guess that's something that I spent quite a lot of time thinking about what did this map do in its time, and how can we think of it as part of this longer theme, but also this, how do we contextualize it in a fair manner?
It's an extraordinary map, because it's an extraordinary engraving, because it's got all these worthies and the subject all focused on a map. And the map, it seems to me a brilliant use of maps to make political and cultural, very strong political and cultural statements. And then you have to interpret it and think about how you decode it and write about it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Fascinating. I know you've got other examples, but the clock ticks on, and maybe we should leave a little time for questions. So